When Jorge Mario Bergoglio stepped onto the loggia of St. Peter's Basilica in March 2013, the Catholic Church was wounded. Scandals, inertia, and a growing sense of irrelevance weighed heavily on the papacy. Then came a name no one expected: Francis, the first pope from Latin America, the first Jesuit, the first to name himself after the man who embraced lepers and renounced wealth. In the decade that followed, Pope Francis would disrupt the institution he led, speak boldly where others had stayed silent, and redefine what it means to shepherd a global flock. This is not a tribute. It is a reckoning with a pontificate that has stirred devotion, division, and dialogue like none in recent memory. The name wasn't a symbol, it was a mission. Francis of Assisi stood for poverty, peace, and kinship with creation. In choosing that name, Bergoglio declared a new vision for the papacy, one of humility, not hierarchy. He paid his own hotel bill, refused the apostolic palace, wore plain white, rode in a Ford Focus. These were not mere optics, they were statements. Pope Francis came not to reign from above, but to walk among the people. And yet, behind this simplicity stood a man shaped by complexity, an Argentine bishop who had survived dictatorship, economic collapse, and a church at war with itself. He knew that reform would not begin with documents. It had to begin with tone, with witness, with a new face of authority. The Roman Curia, the Church's bureaucratic brain, had become, in Francis' words, spiritually Alzheimer's. Diseased by self-interest, resistant to reform, obsessed with power. Pope Francis didn't trim the weeds, he dug at the roots. He convened a council of cardinal advisors from every continent. He restructured financial offices, closed offshore accounts, and began the painful process of cleaning out centuries of entrenchment. But even deeper was the spiritual reform, a shift from a top-down church to one that listens, slowly, messily, to its margins. To conservatives, this looked like chaos. To many others, it looked like long-overdue renewal. Pope Francis was not dismantling doctrine. He was dismantling clericalism, the idea that holiness belongs only to those in collars and cassocks. In 2013, 5 simple words changed everything. Who am I to judge? He said them in response to a question about gay priests. The world heard a rupture. In truth, it was a return to the gospel's core. Pope Francis placed mercy at the center of his papacy, not as a sentimental escape, but as the very logic of the incarnation. He visited prisons, washed the feet of Muslims and women, opened holy doors during the Year of Mercy. He urged the Church not to obsess over rules, but to accompany the broken. In Amoris Laetitia, he pushed for pastoral flexibility with divorced and remarried Catholics, emphasizing discernment over blanket prohibition. But mercy made enemies. Critics saw doctrinal confusion, even betrayal. Bishops submitted formal dubia, doubts, demanding clarification. Francis responded with silence. To him, ambiguity was not always an error. Sometimes it was the necessary space for grace. Pope Francis is no diplomat by training. Yet few popes have had greater geopolitical reach. Behind closed doors, he brokered secret talks between Cuba and the United States. In public, he called out the arms trade, ecological devastation, and the exploitation of the poor. His 2015 encyclical Laudato Si was not just a church document, it was a planetary alarm. He denounced what he called the throwaway culture and demanded ecological conversion, not as ideology, but as theology. He visited the Philippines after a typhoon, stood in silence at Auschwitz, walked through refugee camps, addressed Congress, the UN, and the European Parliament, not as a politician, but as a conscience. But his global stance also made enemies, especially in the United States, where his critique of unregulated capitalism clashed with entrenched alliances between religion and politics. In March 2020, as the world went into lockdown, Pope Francis walked across an empty St. Peter's Square, alone, in the rain. He prayed, he wept, he blessed a world in grief. That moment became iconic, not for spectacle, but for its stark humanity. A solitary figure, vulnerable like everyone else. During the pandemic, Francis preached solidarity. He condemned vaccine hoarding, nationalism, and the illusion of self-sufficiency. He asked the world to choose compassion over competition, to build a future where no one is saved alone. His pandemic theology was not abstract. It was embodied in nurses, grocery workers, the sick, the buried. But no crisis has haunted this pontificate more than abuse. In Chile, Pope Francis initially defended a bishop accused of covering up abuse. The backlash was swift and justified. Survivors cried betrayal. The media condemned him. Then came a turning point. Pope Francis admitted his failure. He invited survivors to the Vatican. He demanded resignations from Chile's entire episcopate. It was unprecedented, but it was also late. Then came the McCarrick scandal, a cardinal exposed as a serial predator. The Church was forced to admit systemic failure at the highest levels. Francis responded with new laws, structures, and commissions. But for many survivors, trust remained broken. The Pope who preached mercy now faced its limits. Could he extend it to the wounded, not just the sinners? In 2021, Pope Francis launched a synod on synodality, an experiment in listening, consultation, and risk. For some, it is the most radical move of his pontificate, not a change in doctrine, but a change in how the Church decides, how it breathes. He has invited women, laypeople, and marginalized voices to speak with authority, not as tokens, but as partners in discernment. And still, he walks a tightrope between tradition and change, between vision and schism. What will the legacy of Francis be? A rupture, a renewal, a question still unfolding? He has not left behind a program. He has left behind a path. In the end, Pope Francis is not easily categorized. He is not liberal or conservative. He is not a revolutionary or a reactionary. He is, above all, a pastor, flawed, human, prayerful. He has disappointed many, inspired millions, and invited all to walk with Christ in a wounded world. The Francis pontificate is not a finished story. It is a living one. And the question it leaves us with is not simply, what kind of church will we be? But more urgently, what kind of people are we becoming?